being a journalist was a calling for a bigger thing. You were giving service to society.
People can have 25 versions of the truth, but there is only one truth.
I still believe all those things. We're living in a post-truth world where anything is possible, and that's really dangerous.
Faye D'Souza is a fearless independent journalist reshaping how news reaches India's citizens. Known for her incisive voice on the urban debate at Mirror Now, Faye stepped away from mainstream media to create her own platform rooted in integrity and public service.
Just visuals of people showing up at her house, wearing white, Bollywood, that sort of thing. None of these things happened.
All this news was generated with our AI model.
My entire career hangs by a thread.
Cameo in one of the most popular series called...
Hi Faye, I'm Faye.
Okay.
What is your advice to people who are listening, who are trying to make a career, who are studying journalism, who are wanting to figure out how do we fix this? Welcome to Awakening Code, a podcast where I talk about innovation, creativity, AI, spirituality, and today we are going to talk about a very exciting topic. We are going to talk about news, and I have the honor of having one of India's most respected journalists, somebody who's been a trailblazer in her field. My guest today started her journey in the Times of India and ended up becoming one of the beacons of Mirror Now with her show, The Urban Debate, which was very, very well received across the country. She's won numerous awards, and now she started her own platform where she's fearlessly reporting news, talking about issues which is affecting India and the world. But more importantly, my guest today is somebody who I know through another very close friend of mine, M.K. Anand. So first of all, let me welcome Faye D'Souza.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to be here. I'm very excited.
Thanks, Faye. And like I was telling you, M.K. Anand, who's my mentor and guru, told me once, when we were looking to advertise in the Times, we were doing some kind of a campaign. And at that time, Arnab was, of course, on Times Now. And he said, forget Times Now. If you have to do something, you have to look at Faye in Mirror Now. And I remember we finally ended up doing that deal. And I think I heard about you that time first from Anand.
From Anand, yeah.
From Anand. But
Anand's been an incredible mentor for so many of us.
But I think what's more exciting about you is that even though having a great career in journalism and being at in one of the big TV channels, you could have very easily taken the path of joining one of the media houses, and by now you would have been head of one of those channels, curating large teams, but you decided to go independent. And this is way back. I mean, this is now we're talking almost 2016, 2017. Right?
So actually, I made the shift just before COVID. It was October 2019 that I made the shift. And, there was this whole plan, I remember at that time, to draw up a business plan and raise the funds and put a newsroom and be able to do the kind of journalism I really wanted to do. And then COVID hit us. And there was no newsroom and there was no plan, and we were just all sitting at home. And I had a couple of young people who followed me, who also left television with me. And so we had formed a team, and we were just cooling our heels at home, not knowing what to do. And at that point, I remember thinking this was the first wave, in Mumbai, where you weren't even allowed outside your front door, let alone outside the building society. And I kept thinking that this is the biggest thing that is happening. We cannot sit this one out. We have to go out and work. Also, a lot of the mainstream television channels were just staying in their studios. And they were, banging plates. And
I remember you went to
you
covered the first hospital. I remember that.
Yes. We were the first. In fact, my colleague Arun and I were the first ones to go inside a hospital in India, into the COVID ICUs, into the wards to find out what is really happening, because nobody had done it up till then. And I just got this sense that, there were doctors and nurses who were really struggling, and no one was asking them what's going on. So that was, that's actually where I started my independent journalism story.
What got you into journalism itself? I know this as a career option, while it has been incredible,
Yeah.
it is something which is still considered not one of the top choices for a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't know. It was a calling for me. Honestly, when I was 17, 18 years old, at that point, Pranay Roy was reading the news at 9 o'clock. I remember, Barkha was covering Kargil. We had the greats were writing for the newspapers, and Ram was in the Hindu. There was really quality talent, across the board, across mediums, across the board, and it was from where we were looking at it in college. Being a journalist was a calling for a bigger thing. You were giving service to society. It was something you wanted to do because you wanted to actually action change on the ground, and it was a noble profession. I know that it has lost a lot of that sheen now. I still believe all those things, but that's why I wanted to do it. And I remember I was really good at mathematics. In Bangalore, we call it second PUC. Here we say +2. So I was studying statistics, mathematics, accounts, and I did really, really well. And my mom had this vision that I would do an MBA, and and my older sister had just completed her BCom and MBA. She had topped Bangalore University and she had topped her MBA. So there were a lot of hopes. And I, shattered those dreams by turning around and saying I would study arts and shift to BA and, study journalism. And my mom thought it was it was a way to get out of it, doing any hard work. And she couldn't believe it because, back then, if you did a BA, you were not serious.
So it was science, commerce, and then arts was like the
arts was like the
last
people were doing
option.
time pass, right? And in college also, I was doing a lot of dramatics and I was doing a lot of extracurricular stuff. I was on the speaking team. I was in the student union. So my mom thought this was a way for me to not do anything hard or serious. But I remember when I was 18, I really, at that point, wanted to be a journalist.
And how did you end up in the Times of India? I mean, best.
Doesn't everybody eventually? No, so it's a slightly longer story. I spent 2 years while I was doing my master's at All India Radio. So that was the first time I read the news was on AIR Bangalore.
Oh, wow.
Some Kannada, mostly English. And then I got a job at CNBC TV 18. This was, back in 2004.
Raghav Bahel. Yeah.
When Raghav Bahel was, yeah. And again, then Network 18, the CNBC was a nursery where a lot of us learned our skill. So I started off there. I was there for nearly 5 years. Then shifted to the Times Group when they were launching ET Now, because at that point I was a business journalist. So I covered a lot of stock markets and insurance, mutual funds, a lot of investments, consumer grievances. And I think that's where my understanding of the rights of the Indian citizen came
And I
from.
remember the urban debate talked a lot about the builders and
Yes,
that
yes,
whole mafia
yes,
you were
yeah,
taking
yeah,
on.
Yeah. So it was a lot about, as a citizen, what are your rights? As a consumer, what are your rights, and are you getting those rights? And my understanding of your relationship with government as a citizen is also that. Like you're a consumer who is paying taxes in return for certain services. Are you getting those services? So that was the whole idea behind the urban debate as well. Like, are you getting the services that you're paying for? And are you being treated with dignity and respect? So that journey came from there. So within ET Now, I was for nearly 8 years looking after personal finance, insurance, mutual funds, real estate, basically all of the things that come with investing your money as a regular citizen. And from there we branched out then to citizen rights and Mirror Now and the urban debate and things like that.
So tell me, I mean, you definitely shared the newsroom with Arnav Goswami. That was the time when he was there in Times Now and, the nation wants to know. And you were like doing urban debate. What was the environment like during those times when when you were in the newsroom?
Well, we weren't in the same newsroom.
I mean the same office.
We were in the same office.
This was the one in Kamla Mills, I assume.
This was
right?
the Kamla Mills. He was upstairs on the first floor. I was on the ground floor in the ET Now floor. I think what Arnab had done back then was change the tone of the way television was being done. So it was less about passing on information more about a spectator sport, about getting people of different opinions to sort of battle it out. It's a gladiator sport, really. Battle it out at night. It gave me a good sort of blueprint yardstick to go against the grain. Because I remember so on the urban debate, we put out these rules saying we will not interrupt, we will not shout someone down, we're not going to cut off anybody's audio. We're going to try and keep this as civil as possible. And I remember there was this one guest who was not in the studio, so he was remote. And he was talking, and he stopped because he thought he had been cut off. And he thought he had been cut off because nobody was interrupting him. So he was like, why isn't anybody interrupting? Am I still on this show? And I said, no, you're still on the show. Continue. We're listening. So it was an interesting, it was an interesting time in television because I think that the influence of television was peaking at that point, and immediately after that, it tanked quite a bit. And it was an interesting sort of format to refute and go against, which is what the urban debate was about.
Yeah. And I think it's interesting to see that, there are a few of you, it is Barkha Dutt who went independent. Ravish Kumar is now, doing this amazing channel. There is, of course, a lot of other independents. But I want to bring up another person who, we both knew very well, who kind of was a big catalyst into you starting up your own venture, which is Samir Bangara. Samir is somebody we both, of course, I knew him from 2002 odd, so almost 23 years. And, Samir and I, of course, spent a lot of time together. And then when he started QK, I believe, you ended up spending a lot of time and got a lot of his mentorship. So what was it like being with Samir?
Samir was an older brother to me. In a way, in a sort of relationship that I didn't have with anybody else, and I don't still have with anybody else. We obviously got to know each other because my husband Sagar and he were working together at QK, and so they would spend a lot of time together. And as a result, the two families would spend a lot of time together. And he and I just became natural friends. And he was a safe space where I was allowed to be who I really was, which is the sort of like bratty side of me. And I remember he always, when I was on television, he always had this idea that, the internet is where you need to be. And it's massive and it's growing, and you can no longer spend time on this medium that is dying. You have to come and, you have to look at what's happening on have to look at what's happening on YouTube and, on social media. And this is where you need to be. And this is where you need to harness all of your, and I have a diary in which the first 4 pages is Samir having drawn up a business plan of what he thought I should be doing when I left television. So that was actually the first conversation I had in this whole journey of being independent. And a lot of the things that he said still ring true. Still things that I go back to on a daily basis when I need, I think as an entrepreneur, you need to constantly ask yourself, why am I still doing this? Why am I doing this? I don't remember why I started doing this, because the going gets hard on a regular basis. So a lot of what Samir said and what he believed and what he did is still alive in the work that I do and the thought process and all of that. So, a brother.
So Samir had this excellent ability to give you the reality pill, but in a extremely sweet way. And I'm sure you experience the same thing, right?
It was really tough with me, though.
No, but he could still tell you a lot of things which are hard, which you don't want to hear as an entrepreneur. But he had a way of telling it. Let me put it that way. That he had his way of putting his points across, where he was part of the problem and he was part of the solution. A lot of times, people just give you either a problem or give you a solution, but don't walk that extra mile. And Samir had the ability. I know that, like he was the, I don't know how many people call him at the middle of the night, and then he will leave everything and go out to help them for whatever problem they have. I have seen that so many times, and I think losing him is, a big loss to all of us. But I think the good part is that he made so many contributions in this industry. I mean, so many people
Yeah.
who started off.
Yeah. It's amazing how many people will say he was a mentor and he was, he was more than a friend. And I kept wondering how many hours were in his day that he was able to mentor so many people
Exactly, yeah.
at the same time, where everyone felt special, everyone felt tended to, everyone felt heard. Um, it's an incredibly difficult thing to do, to give time, and to not just give time, but to make people feel heard and seen, and to actually be able to help them. I think he was exceptional, an
So-
exceptional person.
So, what is happening today in the digital space? Samir had already seen this. He had already predicted this. I remember talking to him about not just QKey, but about his vision of digital and how he used to say broadcasting is not going to be big and all of that. And today we are all seeing in front of our very eyes. We just had our Prime Minister come and do a 2-hour podcast.
Yeah.
When was the last time he gave a 2-hour interview to a channel? Or we have, mainstream politicians now looking at doing their first. I mean, Kejriwal just came on a podcast, and there are many others. And in the US, Donald Trump
Yes.
spent almost 3 hours with Joe Rogan, and
Yeah.
it was almost talked about as one of the things he did was imbibe this new way of interacting with people digitally. So tell me, how did you make this transition? Because it's very difficult for somebody who comes from the linear world
Yeah.
to adopt to the non-linear world. If you see, most success stories are people who directly started as creators themselves and then they
Yeah.
go up.
So I think that the interesting thing about podcasts is the reach, right? The fact that it feels personal. It feels like you're actually in the room with these two people. There is undoubtedly, and more so now than it was 5 years ago when I left television, there's massive mistrust for mainstream media, both here and in the West, where a lot of people just don't trust what mainstream media is telling you. And so the podcast seems more honest as a space. I think that also the podcast, because it doesn't carry the baggage of, as a format, it doesn't carry the baggage of mainstream media, is a more relaxed way where people can actually be themselves, where the answers are not so guarded and so sort of, straitjacketed, which, so someone who's watching actually feels like, okay, I know this person a little better because I watched this podcast. And it's that reach now that we see politicians want to use, because it endears them. So earlier, the journalistic interview on a television channel would be combative, where the journalist would be asking questions in order to get you to a certain point and accept a certain point. But I think that the podcast format is not combative. It's a more relaxed, it's a friendlier, I want to understand more about what you're thinking. It's more of a learning format. And that is also where a lot of now powerful people want to be, because they want to be seen by the audience in that
But I
format.
think it's less about podcast. I think it's a lot about how the mainstream media has failed the audience.
Oh, that's a whole other podcast.
I think the reason for you to look at somebody else is because the news is not, or mainstream media is not doing its job. That's a feeling.
Yes.
Not just in India. This is a feeling
Across the world.
Across the world, that media now is actually, it has a bias for sure. It has an
Yes.
obvious bias.
Yes.
And a lot of this bias is also flowing through the people they have. So the news personalities are not really talking about issues. They are almost talking about or kind of becoming the echo chambers of that particular bias. So are you seeing this becoming, or do you think there's a wake-up call, or do you think this only becoming...
So I think fundamentally, as far as television is concerned, news television in India, the business model is broken. It doesn't work because it's really expensive to run. It costs multiples of hundreds of crores of rupees to run a television channel and to put out the news, even if you do it in the most, without any sort of real journalism. If you just put out the news, it's still expensive because there's licensing, there's distribution, there's all of these things. Where is the revenue going to come from? Who's watching? How many people under the age of 65 do you know who still have a linear television connection?
Yeah.
Nobody. If you attempt to watch it yourself, it's unwatchable because we're so far out of that habit on all of those things, right? So whether you're watching movies or you're watching entertainment, news or sports, these are the four things that people used to watch on television. Movies and entertainment, long gone. Nobody is going back there. Live sports is now all on OTT. So then news is the only one left, and none of the OTT guys, initially they started, but they pulled out because it's too messy in terms of regulation to get into it. So a lot of the news now, is on YouTube. But if you don't have that linear television connection, you're not watching it that way. So where is that revenue going to come from to actually cover the costs of those hundreds of crores of actual production? It's going to come from government sources. Effectively, if you look at your newspapers today, or if you look at any of the big television channels, their main advertisers are governments. Across the board, state and center. So there are these large conclaves that happen that are sponsored by certain state governments, or there are these full page ads, which is this state, that state, this state, that state. These are the guys who are your mainstay advertisers, which means that you are not going to bite the hand that feeds you.
But eventually the government is also going to figure out that nobody is watching these ads. Because if finally
but I think that and again, I'm saying it repeatedly, it's across board, across governments, across political
the world,
parties,
and across
right?
the world,
Across the world. But I think that it's a way to control the voice. Because you want this newsroom, and see right now, even across the world, you have just 3 or 4 large media houses. So you control that entire. You're better off paying them for compliance than pulling it off, because it's not about viewership anymore. It's about.
But for example, there was a time when being on a front page of a newspaper
Meant
showed that it
something.
was an important story. I have not seen a front page of a newspaper for months now, right?
Yeah.
So it's no longer relevant. There was a time if you were on the front page of ET now, that could move the stock market on that, that news.
Yeah.
But today, a tweet or
Possible.
that
You're
is
possible.
more
And
important.
it's interesting to maybe examine which came first in these two things. Did the audience leave these formats because they were inconvenient, or did the audience leave these formats because they were dishonest, or they were biased or leaning towards one side? Whichever happened first, the truth of the matter is the audiences have left these formats.
And that's where the trust and transparency comes in.
Yes.
See, previously, like you said, names of, whether it was Pranoy Roy and Ram, journalism were considered like, it was a question in the school. I remember who's the editor of Indian Express, who's the editor of Times of India. Today, I'm sorry, at least I don't know
Nobody knows,
who the editor of some of these, leading publications are. Because it all started from there. There was a quality and there was a level. Today, that is and people are seeing through it, right? People know this already.
Yeah, so like I said in the beginning, right, there is a sheen to this profession that has been lost. I remember when I started my career and, I would go back home to Bangalore and people would ask me, so what do you do? And I would say, oh, I'm a journalist with CNBC. And they say, oh, wow. I don't think, being a television journalist gets that reaction anymore, which is really sad, because I know that there are a lot of good people who are still working in television, in newspapers, on the internet. We have good journalists. They're just looking for opportunities to do good work. And I think that across the world right now, we're going through this churn where people are accessing their information through different formats. And so they will eventually find the be a plug-in between the good people who are doing the good work and the people who need that information.
No, but I think it's also for the first, like you said, there were CNBC, CNN, NDTV.
Yeah.
These names were considered credible
Yes,
themselves.
yes.
These brands lend. If it was on NDTV, you said that, hey, this news is
Yes.
probably more credible. But today, after the change of ownership and different interests, even though the news may be true, but from a perception wise, people are already looking at news with a very high degree
Yeah.
of skepticism. And with Bezos buying Washington,
Washington
Post,
Post.
and Adani
I mean,
buying NDTV, and
even in a Bezos buying Washington Post, I remember when that did happen, it was this whole idea of this is my sort of social responsibility, and I'm never going to ask a question, and they're going to be able to run it the way it needs to be run, and there's a separation and a Chinese wall, which we know crumbled in this latest election when we understand, made a phone call and told them not to,
endorse
endorse
Kamala
Harris.
Harris. Yeah.
So at the end of the day, ownership does make a difference to
But
news.
is this relevant anymore? It's like, owning a gramophone in an era of where people are listening to digital music, because a lot of people are leaving these platforms or leaving these channels altogether, and they are going after independent voices like you, because today I think people have a higher trust in a Ravish Kumar or a Faye or any journalist, because they believe that at least they have to maintain a degree of trust and transparency. Is that what is really?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think that the younger audience, especially, they prefer authenticity. They prefer to follow individuals rather than brands or organizations. It feels like a personal relationship that they have with an individual. And so there is a tendency to no longer follow these organizations, and instead, I mean, like we said, nobody's actually watching it on television. The question is, are you going to follow it on your social media?
No, because see, one of the things about social media is that you can't fake it.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to keep faking it on social media, while on any other media you can have a persona on television, but your persona offline is different than what you have. For example, we all know that certain anchors may be very aggressive, but in the real world they are absolutely.
No, I mean, you should know that certain anchors are very aggressive about one thing, but in the real world, they believe something else altogether. They live their lives completely
So that's
differently
what I'm saying. So they're
from what
faking
they're,
it.
what they say on television. Yeah. So
Social media, and I think that's what people want to see, right? They don't want you to see that you have changed your opinion because you have shifted jobs, for example. Right?
Yeah.
You can't do that if
Yeah,
you are an
yeah,
independent on social media.
yeah, because it's who you are. It's your personality. It's who you are. It tests you on a regular basis, and I think that there's a great deal of value that the audience or the reader places to authenticity, and somehow, I don't know how, but somehow, the internet can tell when you're fudging something. It just can. It can pick that out,
And it has memory, right? It can even go on your
Yeah,
past, what you said in the
yeah,
past.
yeah. So I think that really matters after a point. That I mean, in an ideal world, I can already see it happen, but I imagine in India where there is a tapestry of journalists who are each doing their own thing, and a combination of all of these people gives you all the information you need. So, like for example, there are smaller organizations now that are covering only Dalit stories. That are covering only tribal stories. There's one organization that only covers Coimbatore, for example, right? So you have the ability to be as niche as you want to be and to do the kind of work that you really care about. And when you put all of that together, as an audience member on the other side, you can follow the people you really believe in. You can follow the news that you really are interested in that's relevant to you. And thereby, you do not have to tap into one of these larger organizations if you can help it.
No, and it's interesting you talked about this, right? For example, I follow Mumbai Rains. There's
Yeah.
this very interesting handle. Now, somehow, I forgot the name of the person running it, but they have the best information about weather than even any other Met department.
And which road you should not take when it is raining. I
and
know, I
it's-
follow them
it's,
too.
It's incredible that how independent one, two-man people have much better news information than organizations and even the Department of...
Yeah, because this is all they do. So they've gotten so good at it. Because they're single-minded focusing, okay, it's only one city, it's only these many roads, it's only this much weather, and we're actually technically relevant only for 4 months in the year.
So which is where do you really think that journalism as a function or journalist is there even a relevance of being a journalist today? If somebody who is not even qualified to do this is just passionate about Mumbai rains and can give better reporting about Mumbai rains, why should anybody go to a journalist or a news site or a news channel or wherever to get this information?
So there is a difference between journalism and plain information. Fundamentally, if I were to put it in a nutshell, right, to be able to tell you that it is raining, so don't take King Circle Matuk because it is flooded. That's information. That's of use to you, and that's great. To be able to tell you that it is raining, King Circle Matunga flooded because there was corruption in the person who took the contract to pump out the water, and the pump was of bad quality. And as a result, these many crores of public/private property was lost and people were inconvenienced and taxpayer money was squandered. That is journalism. And it's very important as audience members to be able to tell the difference between these two things, because there is an element of social service in the second one, where we're not just telling you what you need to know or what you want to know, but we're telling you information that arms you to be a better functioning citizen of the country, where it arms you to vote better, you get the information you need to be able to function better. And there's a difference then between those two
But
things.
this is where the trust comes in.
Yes.
And today, this same information coming from a journalist who's known to be associated with a particular business house or with a particular political party or with a particular thought process, you suddenly think that, hey, this person is saying this because of this bias versus, even though it may be the truth, I think people are able to see a lot of this, and we are seeing, and same thing happened in the US, where Donald Trump openly calls out, New York Times and all these publications on, openly that this is fake news. And same thing is happening with Indian politicians also, where on both sides they are calling news stories totally fake.
So it's a great question, right? I think that you said it yourself, whether or not it's the truth. I think that as audience members, we need to attach ourselves to the idea of, is this the truth? If it is the truth, then to say that, oh, this person is telling me this truth because they're biased is irrelevant.
No, but you don't believe in the truth, thinking that it is biased.
So I think the important part is, do they have proof? Is there enough evidence for what they're putting out? Is it the truth? And we've sort of, and we were having this conversation before we walked in about this idea of fact-checking now seeming like a left-wing thing or a right-wing thing. So free speech has become right-wing in the US and fact-checking has become left-wing. And I think that I found really interesting, because the fact has no wing. Fact is fact. Now, and this for me is interesting, right? I could, to put out information saying CAG, which is the auditor of the government, has said that this kind of money has been wasted by the state government, has not been used. That is fact. But to say this particular chief minister is incompetent is opinion. And so my bias can come into the opinion that I'm giving and the conclusion that I'm reaching, but the fact remains. And I think that it's really important. And this burden, I agree, should not be on the reader. But unfortunately, in the world we're living in right now, it's falling on the person who's consuming the news, that the fact is most important and the opinion is not.
And I think that's where, it's a perfect time to discuss. We just saw, of course, Elon Musk completely disband fact checking and started community notes, and we just saw Meta and Zuckerberg talking that they are also moving to this. And I think it's possibly every organization of every kind is going to stop fact checking and just move to community notes. So now the truth is what people decide and vote. So technically we can decide that today is not Sunday, today is Wednesday,
Yeah.
and if enough people can vote, that becomes the truth.
Yeah, I think that, personally for me, I've found this very triggering. I found this really disturbing because you and I have been having conversations about fact checking now for a while, and I think it's accepted across the board, given the advances in AI, that fact checking or the lack of it is going to change the way the human race progresses. Uh, and this is not only for journalists, right? This is for people who run businesses, for people who are for celebrities, for politicians, for doctors, for everybody. If we don't have adequate fact checking tomorrow, I could fabricate a lie about you, put it up on the internet, get 2,000 people to stamp saying, yes, this is true, and now it is true. Which means you no longer have control over your own life. And that is really scary. Meta saying that it is disbanding its fact-checking endeavors. Meta has 3 billion users across the world. Meta has between Facebook and Instagram and WhatsApp.
It's technically the largest country in the world. If
It's more powerful than any one government, right? And I feel that between Elon Musk and Zuckerberg and maybe the chaps at Google,
yeah.
they control everything. And so if they're going to disband fact checking, we're living in a post-truth world where anything is possible, and that's really dangerous. And I feel like this would be a turning point or a milestone mark in the history of the human race.
Yeah, because if you let's look at the scientific community, right? If you have a new discovery, you publish a paper, you get it peer reviewed.
Yes, which we
there
learned
is
in COVID, right?
Yeah. We all know that how you decide on a scientific fact.
Yes.
It is not community deciding and voting, right?
No, but it's not just that. It's so many things. So you're so right about this. And if we could go on all day. The medical science, the entire industry of medical science is under threat from influencers who will tell you that you can stir this into this and drink it in the morning and it will solve all of your problems. From there to hoaxes during COVID, some very powerful people telling you that you could drink disinfectant and to be able to separate, is this peer reviewed by who, has this been published, what is the nature of the testing that has been done, what is the size of of the sample that was used, what are the variables that they used, okay, this is something now we can publish, to anything is true.
Even if you look at the judiciary, right, any judgment, they talk about other judgments, they talk about,
Yes.
prior, and that's how you come to a judgment. Otherwise, why do we need judges? We can just keep everything on voting, and if there is a dispute.
Oh, good Lord. Well, thankfully, everything that comes out of the courts is written down, and so there's no grey area there. But I think the other big grey area is history. The fact that, today, again, on the internet, you have people who are vaguely fabricating a lot of stuff, making it seem real because you put out a very convincing video that this is actually what happened, and now people start to believe you. Now, if you're dismantling fact-checking and there's nobody pulling down content that is not reliable, it could be very dangerous. I mean, take, for example, in California today, which we're seeing these terrible fires, people getting hurt, if there was some fake information about how to evacuate or where to evacuate to or where to go, you'd really hurt people. You'd really cause real world harm, and that's scary.
So that brings us to a very interesting part of our podcast, where we are going to give you 5 news which we got today. We have
I have to tell you what is real and what is not.
And you have to tell us. You have to first read this for everyone. There's just
Okay.
5. Mm-hmm. And then you have to tell us what is real and what is fake. And then you can say what, because people read news like this. And this is just what you would see in a tweet,
Okay.
or what you would see as a good headline. And then you have to tell us why you think it's real or why you think it's fake. And then tell people that how
So we're
could
live
So we're going to
fact-checking.
live fact checking. So here are the 5 news. So you can just read it out first and then tell me what you think about it.
Okay, so the first one says Microsoft announces a $3 billion investment in India. Microsoft CEO Satya Nadella announces a $3 billion investment to enhance AI and cloud services in India, including training 10 million Indians in AI skills by 2030. Sounds plausibly true. Although I don't know about the
You
number.
don't have AI now. You have to use
I
your
have to
own
use-
brain.
No, I'm a little concerned about the number of $3 billion. That's a lot of money. I know Microsoft's been interested in boosting its AI services and its cloud services in India. So the fact that it's interested in this work, I would believe. The number, I would double check.
Okay, but yeah, you think this is kind of real news. Okay,
Yeah.
so we will give the answers
You'll
later.
give me the
but
answer.
yeah, let's go to
This
the
is
second
terrifying,
one.
by the way. My entire career hangs by a thread. Taliban recognizes India as a significant regional partner. Afghanistan's acting foreign minister highlighted India's role as a significant regional partner in discussions about trade and connectivity. I do know that there is a conversation on where the Taliban is asking India to restart visas for health and for students and for people who from Afghanistan who want to come to India, which India stopped because when the changeover happened, at that point it froze a lot of that work. So this, I would say, is
Strategic
perhaps-
partner.
it- significant regional partner, not a strategic
Yeah,
partner.
significant
So,
regional
I mean, the question is whether India has reciprocated, and that would be something.
So
I
you
would
think
check.
this is real?
It's plausible. It's possible.
Great.
Yeah, it's great. India's economic growth grows to 6.4, prompting Modi government to explore measures like easing monetary policies. I do know that the RBI has reduced its estimate for this financial year to 6.4. So I don't know if we can say that it's slowed completely, but the estimate has come down.
So you think this is kind
This
of
is true. India and Japan signed a $20 billion pact for green hydrogen collaboration. I have no way to tell. India and Japan signed an agreement to establish India as a global hub of green hydrogen exports, investing heavily in renewable technology. I can't comment on this. I have no reference. RBI to introduce digital rupee loans for MSMEs mid-2025. RBI has announced a pilot program to offer digital rupee loans to MSMEs using blockchain real time. Absolutely not. This I know for sure. This is not-
I think the word blockchain and RBI.
No,
boom.
my first question is, what is a digital rupee loan?
Well,
no
so
such
now we
thing.
are going to see. So,
Now we're
so
gonna
first
see
of
the
all,
answers.
all this news was generated with our AI model. This
Okay.
is entirely AI generated. Of course, some of them is true,
Okay.
and some of them is totally made up news.
Okay.
And I think the idea of doing this was to kind of give people that we keep reading, on
Yeah.
Twitter, on WhatsApp, on everything we keep reading snippets,
Yeah.
and a lot of this are true, and some of them is totally made up. So let's take this. So Microsoft. $3 billion investment, absolutely true. This is happening.
Okay.
They have committed $3 billion.
They've committed $3 billion.
$3
Over
billion.
what time frame, though?
By 2030,
Huh.
including training 10 million Indians. Taliban actually has recognized India as a significant. So you were kind of right because,
Yeah.
India's economic growth also, you were right. It is a real news. India and Japan totally made up.
Totally
There
made
is
up. Yeah.
nothing.
Because green hydrogen, I've never
there is
heard of that
nothing right.
before. Yeah.
And of course, RBI introducing digital
Okay,
rupee loan.
so I didn't fail.
No, you got it. You got it right. But that's the whole
Yeah,
point,
yeah.
right? That today, what you read
Yes.
is totally misleading.
And
you don't know. You can't separate.
and you
the
can't
two.
separate the two because it's possible and you're used to, because again, you're not reading the paper physically. Like you said, right? I don't know the last time I opened a paper in my house. So when you're reading it on your phone, it's possible for me to make a website or a social media handle or whatever look exactly like whatever you're used to. Whether it's the Washington Post or the New York Times or NDTV or whatever it is you're reading, I can replicate it completely. And I can create a video of Vishal Gondal with the same voice and the same sound because there's enough of you on the internet. And so I can create anything and make it sound plausibly true. Obviously, nobody's going to write a complete lie about green hydrogen in Japan, but just changing the details here and there. And that is, I think, that's why I personally believe fact checking is going to be the need of the next
No, and
decade.
this is exactly the problem which all the scammers are taking, right? With all the digital
Yes,
arrest, and
yes.
because people have heard that, hey, there are so many raids happening, so people
Mm.
keep hearing that there are things happening, and then
Yeah.
when it happens to them, they actually completely believe this. So whether
I know, it just goes also to show you the lack of faith in our investigative agencies, right? That people think that I could get pulled up for something I have not done.
and it also shows how disciplined our people are. Right? People don't get real arrested here. People are getting digital arrest for 3 days.
It's a really, it's a real and a very scary thing. And I don't know how the consumer can push back to these apps, but there has to be a way in which we can tell them that this is not okay. Fact checking has to be a real
So
thing.
tell me, has there been any instance where you reported something which later on ended up becoming not true? And how have you dealt with such situations?
So we've had a few instances. I have a policy with my team that when we get something wrong, and because, you know, we're human, we will get something wrong. We always apologize. It's part of what you're taught as a journalist, because not only do you have to own up to the mistake, but also if I have told you that India and Japan is doing a green hydrogen thing and they're not doing a green hydrogen thing because it's not true, it is my moral responsibility as a journalist to stop you from believing that any further and correcting that understanding as quickly as I can. So, we had when quite recently when the tabla maestro Zakir Hussain passed away. It was a Sunday evening when that news came out, and my team and I have a certain policy in place that failed us, where we look for at least 2 or 3 verifiable sources, and then we take that information. So the first was that all of the big news organizations had carried it. The Hindu, the Indian Express, um, ANI had it. And then members of government started to write about it, including the Ministry of Culture, the Ministry of Information and Broadcasting. And when it comes from a government source, as a journalist, you take it seriously. And then we released that information saying, yes, this has happened. It turned out it had not happened. And all of these sources had gotten it wrong. And as a result, we had gotten it wrong. And for me, that was a massive learning experience, because it meant that the system that I had built was not foolproof and we had to redo that system. But also, I remember I sat up that night saying, I cannot go to sleep allowing the audience to continue to believe this is true. I have to put up an apology. I don't think there was an apology that was put out by any of these big organizations. The apology is still up on my Instagram page, because that is the that's what I owe my audience. Because I need the audience to know that I am human, I will make mistakes, and they will be.
But there was another case where I think you ended up not reporting it.
Yes,
And I
yes.
remember because we spoke about it, I think,
Yeah,
which was
yeah.
the famous Poonam Pandey episode.
Poonam Pandey
where she
episode.
faked her own death, and
Yes.
every media house
Yes,
carried that
yes,
news
yes.
except you.
So in that case, like I told you, we have a double source fact check within my team, which means that yes, there is one person who has confirmed it, but where is the second confirmation? And in the Poonam Pandey case, there was a post on her Instagram page that such and such a thing had happened, and it said Poonam's team. And so we saw it, and my team called me and saying, should we take this story? Everybody else has carried it. And I said, well, where's the second source? So the second source could have either been a note from a hospital. It could have been some family member. It could have been the actual visual of an ambulance or a hearse leaving from point A to point B.
Or her parents,
Or her parents, or information about funeral rites that will take place at this time, at this time. These are normally how things progress. Or just visuals of people showing up at her house, wearing white, Bollywood, that sort of thing. None of these things happened. And then, so we said, okay, we'll just wait. Let's just wait for something to come until we see some visual proof. We're not going to carry the story, because you never know. Maybe her Instagram handle was hacked and someone wrote it, right? That's not enough to run on. And so we held it, and we just held it until 24 hours, until she herself confirmed that it was not true.
That was a fake news.
That
Totally.
was that was the fake
not just
news.
fake. It was
It was
made
faked news. It
Faked
was made up
It
news.
was made up
It
news.
was made up
And
news.
that is the problem today, right? You can't believe what you read. You can't believe what you see. You can't believe what you hear.
Yeah.
So how do you run a news business in this world where nothing can be believed?
So I think that it brings us back to the same thing. Fact checking is going to become more and more important. Like I said, right? So just to compare the two instances, in the Poonam Pandey instance, our double fact check worked. In the second instance, our double fact check did not work for us. We need to actually add a third layer to it and wait for a further confirmation on things like that. So I think that when we are talking about AI generated fake news or AI generated, manipulated, exaggerated news,
Faked news.
the solution has to come from AI. I don't think real time a human being or as many human beings can fact check, given the rate at which AI
They
can
say
generate.
चोर को पकड़ने के लिए चोर.
We
Set
need
a
to-
thief to catch a thief.
We need a thief to catch a thief. So, unfortunately, right now, from my understanding of the market, I've spent some time, talking to various people. There are, right now, all fact checking is happening by human beings who are sitting and checking for the next source and checking and basically looking at that photograph and breaking it down and doing that forensic analysis of the video, of the photograph, of the lip sync, of the audio. We need to develop AI tools that can do this. And it needs to be AI tools that can do it live, real time. Because at the pace at which money is being poured in to develop AI that can deepfake, we're not pouring in the same kind of money globally into developing AI tools that can detect. In India, there is a deeper problem. The AI detection for video and audio is happening overseas. It cannot recognize Indian languages. It cannot recognize Indian faces. It cannot recognize Indian articulation. We need to develop in India for this. And it's going to catch up really quickly. Like India leapfrogs all the time, right? So we've already seen in the last election, there was a fake video of Amir Khan. There was a fake video of, like, I think Ranveer Singh that was put up. They were endorsing political parties when they had actually not. That's just scratching the surface. Can you imagine using AI to put out videos in multiple Indian languages? To put out fake news in multiple Indian languages, to fake headlines like you have done it? How are we ever going to sit as human beings and fact check everything? We're going to have to develop those AI tools to be able to do that.
So there's a very interesting story where certain politicians have started carrying an extra finger. So they have an extra finger when they do all interviews, because then they can say, hey, this was not me, because AI always makes a mistake in your fingers.
That's a good way to sort of like deny everything that you have said.
So people are trying to game AI over here, but that was on a lighter note. But coming to, again, something very interesting, you recently had a cameo in one of the most popular series called Call Me Bay, where the character Bay ends up being in a scenario where it's about unethical journalism, and it's about truth over sensationalism, and she comes to you for advice.
Yeah.
There is in that particular episode, Bay comes to you for advice on exactly this. So while you gave some great advice to Bay on Call Me Bay, what is your advice to people who are listening, who are trying to make a career, who are studying journalism, or who are in these news channels, or who are wanting to figure out how do we fix this?
So it's tough. I acknowledge that it's tough. I also spend a lot of time talking to college students. And so I know that even those who are studying journalism are really lost about where to go. But I think that the advice I normally give young people is that the profession stands. There are a lot of great journalists in this country who are holding their ground, who are doing great work. And you will not have a scenario where there is no journalism, because there will be no democracy. The democracy cannot stand if you don't have journalism. It has to happen. It's not going to disappear. We are living in a really scary world where we just lost a colleague, a young journalist, to a terrible crime where he was murdered for exposing the truth about a bridge, and that contractor went after him. Yes, that is the world that we are living in, but that also means the profession is still alive, and we have to do whatever we can as citizens to protect the profession. I think that if we believe that we want a democracy and we want a democracy that functions, we have to support journalists that we believe in. I also tell young people that look for a great editor to work with. So make sure that your first job is with someone you really respect. If you work with someone who is of malleable ethics, you will wind up getting disillusioned, and you'll leave the profession really quickly. But hang in there, because there are a lot of great people doing a lot of good work, and it still exists.
Today, for most people, the news source is digital because that's live, that's happening right now.
Yeah.
Whether it is the LA fires or
Yes.
what's happening in your neighborhood, you're more likely to find this news online. So, in this medium, how can journalists add value? Because the news is already too late, right? I mean, you had to report live. Everything is happening live right now on social media.
So I think, and this is a really great and conversation to actually break down the environment we're in right now. You believe that if something is important enough, it will find you. That's possibly true. I would rephrase that statement and say, if something is trending enough, it will find you.
Yeah.
Right? Which means that through the course of the day, you will probably be told the same thing over and over again by the algorithm across your social media. So if LA fires is trending and the visuals are really dramatic, you will keep seeing it every time you open your phone. And that's fine. Now you are adequately informed about what's happening in LA. You are not adequately informed, though, about what's happening in your own country, because there is a level of curation that is necessary there. Because not all stories will trend, but there are stories that are relevant to you that will not find you unless someone curates them. What is the pollution levels in Mumbai? Why is Mumbai polluted? Is it going to get worse? Is anybody doing anything about it? Do you have an elected representative in the BMC that you can talk to? Do you know the answers to these questions?
No.
No. This is not as dramatic as the LA fires, and it did not find you in the algorithm. The truth is, we have not had BMC elections for 2 years, and so there is no elected representative that you can go to at all. And you don't know this because the algorithm has not thrown it up. But you need a human being to curate this information for you, because it's important to you, because it's relevant to you. So yes, a lot of trending stuff will find its way to you, but it's more than that. In order to fully arm you to be an adequate and functioning citizen, you need more information than just what is trending, because what's trending is what is interesting. But news is not just what is interesting. News is what is important. And that is different for different people.
And that needs curation.
That needs curation.
So like I was telling you, I have deleted every news app from my phone.
Yes.
I don't get
Well, you can put the
newspapers.
Beetroot News app back.
I don't get newspapers. I
Yes.
don't see online. But what I believe is that if there is an important news, it finds me. But that's,
Yes.
of course, it tends to be a lot more trending news versus
Yeah.
what is important.
So this is what I say that a lot of, and I know that you have 2 young boys, young men, who I know a lot of them are really into, say, football and European football. And so they'll follow a lot of that and they'll read a lot of that. And so they will be very adequately informed on the fortunes of Manchester United, but they don't know what's happening in their own country. Yeah. And that's what the algorithm does. It pushes what it thinks you are interested in.
No, but isn't that what we want to now do, right? A lot of times it doesn't matter to me, right? My interest is Manchester United. I don't care what's happening in some gully cricket tournament.
No, not gully cricket tournament, but you're breathing the air of the city that you're living in. Right? And Manchester United's fortunes is not making permanent damage on your lungs. or your children's lungs.
Yeah. And I think
And you're paying the taxes, and you have a right to know where that money is going. You have a right to know what taxes you're being charged. You have a right to know the changes that are being made. Like, for example, it's a story we wrote a couple of days ago where the Bombay High Court has pulled up the government of the city saying, what are you doing about the pollution? Should we consider taking all diesel cars off the road? Do you have a diesel car? Is that information of interest to you? It's not about Manchester United. It's probably not going to get picked up by the algorithm, but it's important. So if the High Court is telling the government that you're not doing enough or you need to do this, for example, this is information that is relevant to every single person who lives in this city. But if we rely only on the algorithm, it's not going to pop up to you.
I think, and that's the problem, right? That we are becoming echo chambers of what we want to listen,
Yeah.
and we are fed that information over and over again, and now with community notes, that only becomes more reinforced
yeah.
of what you think. And since your news is different than my news, all our feeds are
different,
are different versus one newspaper front page which everybody saw. Today we are seeing a million versions of the
Yes.
top headline,
Yes.
which I believe is most important for me.
For you, yeah.
For me, and which may or may not be true because
And as we know, the way the headlines are written, the words that are used, all of that makes a difference to what you finally decide and how you interpret it in your mind, right? So one of the things, in fact, 5 years ago when I left television, I actually sat with A4 size sheets of paper and I had asked myself, life-altering questions. Do I want to be a journalist? Or do I want to do something else altogether? If I want to be a journalist, what kind of journalist do I want to be? What kind of journalism do I want to do? And I had reached the conclusion that there is no, like you have rightly said, there's no dearth of information on the internet. There's enough information. There is a dearth of credibility. So you need someone to curate, tell you these are the 5-6 things that are important. And these 5 things I have fact-checked for you. So you are not running the risk of reading something that is not fact-checked. You're not running the risk of believing something that's not fact-checked. And your time has been well used to read 4 or 5 things. The other most important thing I had realized is that it is not my job to tell you how to feel about something. It is only my job to tell you what has happened. So as an exercise in the last so many years, I do not write my opinion on any of the news at all. So I will just write in absolute, literal, colorless, black and grey what has happened and then leave it. Because it is an act of respect to the reader that you are intelligent enough to figure out for yourself if this is a good thing or a bad thing or how you should.
But is it also because you don't want to get on that, because the minute you express an opinion, then there are 2 sides who will come and attack you and troll you.
So the 2 sides will come and attack and troll anyway. I think the trolls do it because they get paid and they'll do it irrespective. But I think the important part is not writing an opinion then means here is a centrist news source that you can interpret any which way you want to. I'm not writing on this side, I'm not writing on that side either. I've just literally told you what you want to do. And I have a lot of people who are on both sides, who are very red-blooded on both sides, who say, I come and read it here, and then I make my opinion, and then I go out and write it in different
and that's
places.
an excellent. You see, one of the big challenges of AI, which everybody's talking about, is the biases and the weights.
Yes.
So when AI models are giving you information or they are generating information, they can be trained to respond in certain ways.
Yes.
And that bias can be defined by who the creators of this AI are. Or,
Yes.
for example, if I'm an insurance company, I can train the model to figure out to generate the maximum profit for me, which could mean that certain claims could be denied or delayed because that gets more profit to the company, that even though that may be the right thing to do. Or if I'm a bank or if I'm a company who's recruiting people, I could have certain inherent biases into the algorithm itself. Now, the same problem is coming with news. That today we have more and more AI generated models which take the facts you give. So the fact is, let's say, the raw material, but then the minute you add the bias to it of any kind, that creates the problem. So I'm getting actually to an important segment here where we want you to, what we say, codify what does it mean to be a journalist in the AI era. So
Okay.
if we have to create a journalism code, a new code for journalists, I know traditionally journalists were taught about verifying
Yeah.
sources and
Yeah.
researching, going in the field, interviewing people. Today the problem is journalists are also searching online for
Yeah.
information.
Yeah.
So technically everything can be
Yes.
can be rigged,
Everything can be adulterated. Yeah.
right? You
Yeah.
could have fake digital footprints
Yes.
created
Yes.
to justify a particular news. So what do you think should be the code for journalists going forward?
So I would say, for as far as you can, we need to create systems of fact checking that are multi layered. So yes, verify your sources, but also, we need to start including forensic checking of photographs. We need to start including checking of videos, checking of audios, and hopefully there will be tools that will become more and more accessible to a lot of journalists to be able to do that. And like you kept saying, we live in a world where you don't believe what you see, you can't believe what you hear, you can't believe what you read. So the fundamental code should be to first not believe anything. And then we have to build in systems with tools where every single piece can be checked. And you have to run with the assumption that this is fake and someone has created it fake. And then you have to then, sort of disprove that. So I do believe that the job is going to become more and more about just tackling and fact checking AI.
And what about speed versus integrity? Everybody wants to do breaking news while you wanted to wait for a day to verify.
Yeah. So I think that, speed is a huge problem. Even when I was on Mirror Now, we had an internal joke called Last on Mirror Now. Because the rest of the channels would have this, they'd have a bumper saying first on such and such channel. Like you've got it first here. We hadn't even designed that because we did not want to be first. And now, even more, and a lot of times people will tell me that, oh, your news on Instagram and your app is a little late. I feel like it's like 12
Stale.
hours
It's stale.
And I was like, yeah, because that's how long it takes us to actually put it through the system. And so it's available for people who value that integrity over the speed. Because our aim is to reduce errors as far as possible. Our aim is not to be able to tell you first. So there will be people whose aim will be to tell you first. I'm just not one of those people.
So you believe it's about integrity and not
100%. 100%. Because I think that, like I said, right, you said it yourself. Live visuals are hitting your phone. It doesn't even matter where that source is from. You have no relationship with the source that's sending you those visuals. You're just looking at the visuals because they're dramatic. There's no point in being in that. I don't see myself in that game or that race. Integrity, where things are fact checked and we're giving you actual information, that is the space to be.
But now in the era where fact check itself is fact checked
Substack.
by somebody else,
Yeah.
what happens?
Like I said, right, every problem will come with a solution. And I do believe, and I know that right now, even in India, there are lots of people who are working on AI tools that will aid fact checking, that will help us fact check. And I think that was going to become the route going forward.
So, what is your advice for aspiring journalists or podcasters or people who want to report news or talk about an important issue about news? Is there any kind of is there any book they can read or any podcast they can listen to? How do they imbibe your code into what they do?
So, I would say, as we go further and further into this world, people who value the truth, value process, who value facts will become sought after. Because you will have this chaos that will build over the next few years. So even though it might seem like a storm, dig your heels in. remember the things that are important, which is always check your facts. Always remember that your loyalty is to your audience and to nobody else. Always remember that uh, as a journalist, there are ethics that make you different from any other content creator. And if this is what you really want to do, stick with it, because it's going to become really important in the days to come.
And they say Satyameva Jayate, right? Finally,
Always.
truth will prevail. I
Yes.
mean, people can have 25 versions of the truth, but there is only one truth.
I go to bed every morning, just believe. I go to bed every night, just believing that the truth will prevail.
The truth will prevail. So, again, thanks a lot, Faye. This was incredible. But we have one last thing we'll do. So, we have this interesting tradition where the last guest on the show, without knowing who the next guest is, gets to
Okay.
ask a question,
Okay.
which you have to answer. So this question actually has come from our guest Aryan Sharma, who was here.
Oh,
He's
okay.
this
The young man.
19-year-old
Yes.
AI genius who's changing the world. And he had a very interesting question. He said that 10 years out, what is the world you'd like to live in? Do you have a version of utopia 10 years down from today?
Um,
And you also get to ask a question to our next guest. So let's start.
I think the world I would like to live in my utopia is where we go back to the basics, where we acknowledge climate change, we do what is needed to tackle climate change, where we wind down the capitalism in our cities that is preventing us from doing the right thing, that we put our children and the earth first. I mean, I would I would love to see cities that value open spaces, that value green spaces, that are dealing with their garbage responsibly, that are dealing with their sewage responsibly, that are dealing with the air and water responsibly, and doing it collectively, because we just put our foot down and say, this is non-negotiable. We're not going to live any other way. And it's not important to us how much money we think we're making, because you cannot breathe money and you cannot eat money, and you need air and water and food, and these are basic things. And in my utopia, we put that first.
Truly incredible. And your question to the next guest, whoever it is.
Where do you see the relationship of AI and art, if at all, going forward?
Wow. AI and art. Once again, thanks a lot, Faye.
Such a pleasure. I really had a good time. Thank you so much.
No, we had a good time too. And for everyone out there, this is the real truth. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Vishal.